My wife grinned and said, "I have a date tonight. Hope you're not jealous." But my reply wiped the smirk right off her face. I'll tell you what happened that morning, step by step, because looking back now, I realized the signs were all there. Ashley and I had been married for 3 years, and we had this routine where we'd sit in our kitchen every morning with our coffee before I headed to the auto shop. She'd be scrolling through her phone while I read the local news on my tablet, and we'd talk about our day ahead. That Tuesday started like any other in our Milwaukee home, the autumn sun streaming through our kitchen window, the smell of fresh coffee filling the air, and the comfortable silence of a couple who'd settled into their rhythm. Ashley was wearing that blue sweater I'd gotten her for Christmas, her blonde hair still messy from sleep, and she had this expression on her face that I couldn't quite read. She was stirring her coffee with this little smile that seemed different somehow. Now, Ashley had her quirks. She always stirred her coffee once, clockwise, and then set the spoon down on the same spot on the counter. But that morning, she stirred it twice. I noticed because in 3 years of marriage, I'd never seen her stir it twice. "So," she said, still stirring, "I'm going on a date tonight." The words came out so casually, like she was telling me about a dentist appointment. I looked up from my tablet, sure I'd misheard her. "What? A date? Don't be jealous, Jason." She said it with this smug little grin, like she was proud of herself for being so bold. My heart started pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "A date?" I repeated. "Yes, with someone I've been talking to. It's nothing serious, just dinner and maybe a movie." She was still stirring that coffee, round and round, like she was mixing up the perfect storm. I sat there for a moment, watching her, and something clicked in my mind. All those late nights when she said she was working extra shifts at the bank. All those times she'd come home with a different perfume scent clinging to her clothes. All those moments when she'd guard her phone like it contained state secrets. The pieces started falling into place with a clarity that was almost painful. "Well," I said, setting down my tablet and looking directly at her, "I hope your date thanks me for fixing those squeaky bed springs last weekend. Should make things much more comfortable." Ashley's spoon dropped into her coffee mug with a sharp clink. The smug smile vanished from her face, replaced by something that looked like shock mixed with panic. Her cheeks flushed red, and for the first time in months, she seemed genuinely speechless. "What's that supposed to mean?" she managed to whisper. I stood up, picked up my coffee mug, and walked over to rinse it in the sink. "It means exactly what it means, Ashley. Enjoy your date." I gave her a calm smile, the kind you'd give a stranger at the grocery store, and headed upstairs to our bedroom. She followed me, her voice rising. "Jason, what are you talking about? It's just a casual dinner." But I was already closing the bedroom door behind me. I turned the lock, something I'd never done in our entire marriage, and sat down on the edge of the bed. I could hear her on the other side, knocking softly at first, then more insistently. "Jason, please, let's talk about this." But I just sat there, staring at the wall, processing what had just happened. My wife of 3 years had just announced she was going on a date, told me not to be jealous, and expected me to what? Wish her luck? Make her a sandwich for the road? The audacity of it was almost impressive. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through our text messages from the past few weeks. All those times she'd said she was working late. All those weekends when she'd suddenly had to help her sister move or attend a work conference. I'd been so focused on building our life together, working extra hours at the shop to save for the down payment on a house, that I'd missed the obvious signs. Or maybe I'd chosen to ignore them. Either way, I was done ignoring them now. The knocking on the door had stopped. I could hear Ashley's footsteps retreating down the hallway, and then the sound of the front door closing. She'd left for work, or wherever she was really going. I sat there for another hour, not moving, just thinking. Then I got up, got dressed, and headed to Mike's auto repair like it was any other day. Because in a way it was. It was just the first day of the rest of my life without Ashley. The next few days were like living in some twisted alternate reality where everything looked normal on the surface but felt completely wrong underneath. Ashley acted like nothing had happened, chatting about her day at the bank, asking about my work at the shop, even suggesting we watch a movie together on Friday night. But I noticed things I'd never paid attention to before, The way she angled her phone away from me when she texted, how she'd suddenly started taking longer showers, and the fact that she'd bought new lingerie that I'd never seen her wear around the house. I started paying closer attention to her belongings, and that's when I found it. Ashley kept a small planner in her purse, one of those leather-bound things where she wrote down appointments and reminders. She'd left it on the kitchen counter Thursday morning while she was getting ready for work. I flipped through it, not really expecting to find anything conclusive, but there it was, tucked between the pages for last week. A napkin from Romano's restaurant, the fancy Italian place downtown that we'd never been to because it was way out of our budget. But it wasn't just any napkin. Someone had written, "Same room, same time," in red ink, and there was a lipstick mark pressed into the corner like a kiss. My hands started shaking as I held it up to the light. The handwriting wasn't Ashley's, it was too bold, too masculine. I took a photo of it with my phone, then carefully placed it back exactly where I'd found it. The rest of the day at the shop, I couldn't focus on anything. Mike kept asking if I was okay, but I just told him I was tired. That evening, Ashley announced she was going out with some girlfriends from work. "Just a girls' night," she said, putting on that black dress she'd worn to our anniversary dinner last year. "Don't wait up." I watched her apply her makeup with extra care, spraying on more perfume than usual, and I knew. I waited 20 minutes after she left, then got in my truck and drove to the Marriott downtown. I'd had a hunch, and sure enough, there was Ashley's car in the parking garage. I parked a few rows away and walked into the lobby, trying to look casual. The hotel bar was dimly lit, and I spotted them immediately. Ashley was sitting in a corner booth with a guy I'd never seen before. He was tall, muscular, with the kind of confident smile that probably worked on a lot of women. This had to be Brett, the personal trainer she'd mentioned in passing a few months ago. I watched them for about 15 minutes, noting how she laughed at everything he said, how she kept touching his arm, how she looked at him the way she used to look at me. They finished their drinks and headed to the elevator together. My chest felt tight, but I forced myself to stay calm. I followed them, hanging back far enough to avoid being seen, and watched the elevator stop at the 7th floor. I waited a few minutes, then took the next elevator up. The hallway was empty, and I could hear voices coming from room 712. I stood there for a moment, listening to my wife's laughter mixing with his deeper voice, and then I made my decision. I went back down to the business center off the lobby and printed out two things: the photo I'd taken of the napkin and a screenshot of Ashley's work calendar showing she'd blocked out this exact time with the note, "Personal appointment." I slipped both papers into an envelope from the front desk and wrote, "For your consideration," on the outside. Then I went back upstairs and slid it under the door of room 712. The voices inside stopped abruptly, and I could hear movement, probably someone walking to the door. I was already halfway down the hall by then, taking the stairs instead of the elevator. I drove home and sat in my living room, waiting. Ashley came home around midnight, trying to be quiet as she slipped through the front door. "How was girls' night?" I asked from the couch, startling her. "Oh, it was fun," she said, not meeting my eyes. "We went to that new place on Water Street." But I could smell it on her, a different perfume, something heavier and more expensive than what she'd been wearing when she left. And there, just barely visible on the side of her neck, was a small smudge of red lipstick that matched the mark on that napkin perfectly. "That's nice," I said, turning back to the TV. "I'm glad you had a good time." Friday morning started with Ashley's phone buzzing nonstop. She'd left it on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower, and I could see text after text lighting up the screen. Most of them were from a contact labeled BT, Brett, I assumed. The messages were coming in so fast that I couldn't read them all, but I caught glimpses of words like envelope, evidence, and what do we do now? When Ashley came downstairs, her hair still damp from the shower, she grabbed her phone with shaking hands and started scrolling through the messages. Her face went pale as she read, and I watched her fingers fly across the screen as she typed back furiously. "Everything okay?" I asked, buttering my toast like nothing was wrong. "Yeah, just work stuff," she said, not looking up from her phone. But her voice was tight, strained in a way I'd never heard before. The phone rang, and she glanced at the caller ID before quickly declining the call. It rang again immediately. She declined it again. By the third ring, Her hands were visibly trembling. You should probably answer that, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. It sounds important. She shot me a look that was part panic, part suspicion, but she answered the phone this time. Hello. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I could hear a man's voice on the other end, talking fast and urgent, though I couldn't make out the words. Ashley kept saying, I don't know, and calm down, and we'll figure this out. Finally, she hung up and turned to me with this forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Jason, we need to talk. Sure, I said, finishing my toast. What's on your mind? It's about the other night. I know you might have gotten the wrong impression, but Brett is just a friend from the gym. We were just catching up over dinner. I nodded thoughtfully. Brett, the personal trainer. Yes, exactly. He's been helping me with a workout routine. At the Marriott Hotel? The question hung in the air between us like a loaded gun. Ashley's face went through several expressions: surprise, fear, then something that looked like calculation. How did you? She started, then stopped herself. Yes, we had dinner at the hotel restaurant. It's nothing inappropriate, Jason. I don't know why you're being so paranoid. Paranoid, I repeated, setting down my coffee mug. That's an interesting word choice. Tell me, Ashley, what room number was the restaurant in? What? The hotel restaurant. What room number? She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I don't understand what you're asking. I'm asking because I'm curious about this restaurant that apparently exists on the 7th floor of the Marriott, specifically in room 712. The color drained from her face completely. She sat down hard in the chair across from me, her phone clattering onto the table. Jason, I can explain. I'm sure you can. But before you do, I have a question about your planner. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photo I'd taken of the napkin. Can you explain what same room, same time means? And whose lipstick that is? Ashley looked at the photo, then at me, then back at the photo. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, harder, more defensive. You went through my personal things? You followed me? Jason, that's controlling behavior. That's not normal in a healthy relationship. Controlling, I said, leaning back in my chair. Interesting. So let me get this straight. You announce you're going on a date, tell me not to be jealous, spend the evening in a hotel room with another man, come home with his lipstick on your neck, and I'm the one with the problem. It wasn't like that, she snapped. You don't understand. You've been so emotionally unavailable lately, working all the time, never wanting to talk about anything real. I was lonely, Jason. I needed someone who actually paid attention to me. So you found Brett. So I found a friend who listens to me, who makes me feel valued. In hotel rooms. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. It just evolved. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our quiet street. Mrs. Peterson was walking her dog. The mailman was making his rounds. Everything looked so normal, so peaceful. Ashley, I said, turning back to her, I need you to pack some things and stay at your mother's for a while. What? The word came out as a whisper. I think we both need some time to think about what we want from this marriage. And I need some space to figure out how I feel about everything. Jason, please. We can work through this. I'll cut contact with Brett. We can go to counseling. We can. Pack your things, Ashley. My voice was calm, steady. Take whatever you need. I'll be at the shop if you want to talk later. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. Behind me, I could hear her calling my name, but I didn't turn around. About 2 hours later, while I was underneath a Honda Civic changing the oil, Mike called out that I had a visitor. I rolled out from under the car to find Linda, Ashley's mother, standing in the doorway of the shop. Linda was in her 50s, a retired teacher who'd always been protective of her daughter, and she looked ready for battle. Jason, she said, her voice sharp with disapproval. Ashley called me in tears. She said you threw her out of the house over some misunderstanding about a friend from her gym. I wiped my hands on a rag and stood up. I didn't throw her out, Linda. I suggested she stay with you while we work through some issues. Issues? Her voice rose. She told me you've been accusing her of having an affair. She said you've been following her around, going through her things. This doesn't sound like the Jason I know. You're right, I said, pulling out my phone. It's not the Jason you know. But sometimes people change when they have to. I showed her the photo of the napkin and the hotel evidence. Linda took the phone, squinting at the screen. Her expression shifted from defensive to confused to something that looked like dawning realization. Jason, I don't know what to say. Ashley told me you were being paranoid, that you were imagining things. I know this is hard to hear, Linda. I love Ashley, but I can't pretend this isn't happening anymore. She handed me back my phone and stood there in silence for a moment. Finally, she spoke, her voice much quieter than before. She's been different lately. More secretive. I thought it was just stress from work, but... She trailed off, shaking her head. I need to have a conversation with my daughter. 2 weeks passed in a strange kind of peace. Ashley had been staying at her mother's house, and according to Linda, things weren't going well. Apparently, Brett had ended whatever they had going on the moment he realized there was evidence of their affair. He told her it was getting too complicated, Linda had said when she stopped by the shop again. That he wasn't looking for anything serious. I felt a twinge of something, not quite satisfaction, but maybe validation. Ashley had thrown away 3 years of marriage for a guy who bailed the second things got messy. I'd been using those 2 weeks to think, to really process what I wanted from my life. I'd started going to Dr. Williams, a marriage counselor, not because I wanted to save my marriage, but because I needed to understand how I'd gotten to this point. During our sessions, it became clear that Ashley had been manipulating situations for months, making me feel like I was the problem whenever I questioned her behavior. Gaslighting, Dr. Williams called it. She was rewriting reality to make you doubt your own perceptions. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Ashley decided to come home. I was at the shop, working on a transmission rebuild, when Mike came over with a concerned look on his face. Jason, your wife's been calling the shop phone. She says she can't reach you on your cell and needs to talk to you urgently. I'd changed my number the week before, something I probably should have mentioned to Ashley, but hadn't gotten around to. What did you tell her? That you were busy with a customer and would call her back. But she sounded pretty upset. I nodded and went back to work. About an hour later, my new cell phone rang. It was Linda. Jason, Ashley went to your house. She's not taking it well. Taking what well? The locks. You changed the locks. I had indeed changed the locks. I'd also left a note taped to the front door that simply said, "This number is no longer in service. Please contact through my attorney if needed." It wasn't cruel, just clear. She's on her way to the shop, Linda continued. She's pretty worked up. I thought you should know. I thanked Linda and hung up. About 20 minutes later, Ashley burst through the shop doors like a hurricane. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes were red from crying, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Jason, she called out, marching over to where I was working. We need to talk. Now. I looked up from the transmission I was rebuilding. Hey, Ashley. How are you? How am I? How am I? Her voice was rising, and I could see Mike and the other guys trying to look busy while obviously listening. You changed the locks on our house. You changed your phone number. You left me a note like I'm some kind of stranger. You're not a stranger, I said calmly, wiping my hands on a rag. But you're not my wife anymore either. What's that supposed to mean? Jason, I know I made mistakes, but we can work through this. Brett was nothing. He was just a distraction. I realize now that what we have is real, what we have is worth fighting for. I looked at her for a long moment, this woman I'd loved for 3 years, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not longing. Just a kind of empty clarity. Ashley, do you know what I learned about myself these past 2 weeks? What? I learned that I'm not available for games anymore. I'm not available for someone who thinks marriage is something you can take breaks from when you get bored. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wedding ring. I'd stopped wearing it the day she left. I set it on the workbench between us with a soft metallic click. I'm not available for someone who thinks, "Don't be jealous" is an appropriate way to announce a date with another man. Ashley stared at the ring, then at me, then back at the ring. Jason, please. I love you. I made a mistake, but I love you. I know you do, Ashley. But love isn't enough anymore. Respect is. Trust is. And those are things you can't just decide to give back after you've taken them away. She stood there for a moment, looking lost and small in a way I'd never seen before. Then she picked up the ring and held it out to me. I don't want this to be over. It's been over since the morning you told me about your date, I said gently. I just finally accepted it. That was 6 months ago. Ashley tried calling Linda's house a few times, tried reaching out through mutual friends, even showed up at the shop once more. But I'd learned something valuable from Dr. Williams. Sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. Silence has a way of speaking louder than any argument ever could. These days, I'm dating Amy, who manages the coffee shop 2 blocks from the auto shop. She's honest about her day, doesn't guard her phone like state secrets, and when she says she's going somewhere, she actually goes there. We take things slow, we talk about everything, and she makes me laugh in ways I'd forgotten were possible. Amy knows about Ashley, about the divorce, about all of it. And she's never once made me feel like I was asking for too much when I asked for basic honesty and respect. Sometimes I see Ashley's car drive past the shop, slowing down like she's thinking about stopping, but she never does. Linda told me Ashley moved to Madison, got a job at a different bank, and is trying to figure things out. I hope she does figure it out, I really do. But I also hope she figures it out far away from me, because I've built something good here, something solid, something based on the revolutionary idea that marriage should be a partnership, not a performance. And I'm not available for anything less than that anymore.